He's a rabbit with a habit. He's skinny but they call him Fat Rabbit. He's a rabbit and there you have it. If he offers you a drink you better grab it.
Chapter 4. A Change of Heart. A short while later, the intermittent wailing and sobbing that had drifted on the air throughout the afternoon was interrupted by a very loud, piercing, and rather unusual sound best described as the noise of a cuckoo being throttled, which in a way it was. Cook eek! Cook eek! Cook eek! The sound emanated from Fat Rabbit's kitchen, where our hero was balanced on a chair and moving the hands of an old Bavarian cuckoo clock to each hour in turn, whilst avoiding the high-velocity cuckoo that shot out from behind its little wooden door to cry "Cook eek!" before being wrenched back into the clock. The clock had been sent to Fat Rabbit from that faraway land by his great travelling Aunt Jemima, with a note to say that the bellows and volume control were a little broken, but that she was sure that her favourite nephew would have no trouble in fixing it. Great Aunt Jemima was always sending souvenirs of her journeys to Fat Rabbit, and curiously enough, they were always invariably broken or dysfunctional in some way, and usually ended up in the cellar. Neither Fat Rabbit nor any of the other animals had been able to get the cuckoo to oo, or even to eek more quietly. It was Treacle who had saved it from being cellared by suggesting that it could be used as an alarm to summon all the animals of Fat Rabbit's farm and Dodgy Tenor Wood to the kitchen whenever there was need for a crisis meeting. Added to that, she thought it was very pretty, and it would be a shame for it to gather dust in the cellar when it could be hung up to gather dust in the kitchen, as long as the little wooden door was held shut to keep the cuckoo imprisoned until a time of crisis. Useful indeed it had been, for the noise of the strangled cuckoo could be heard across the valley, all through Dodgy Tenor Wood, as far as Tumbling Hill and beyond, and could probably even be heard in the dark depths of Scary Wood. But as no one ever went there for obvious reasons, we cannot be sure. So now, on this day, across the valley, ears were pricked, heads turned, and noses twitched as the strangled summons sounded out far and wide. Within about 10 minutes, Fat Rabbit's kitchen was once again bustling with his friends. Lightning the owl, definitely the oldest and possibly the wisest animal in the valley, was, as usual, the last to arrive, complaining grumpily about the fact that these meetings always seem to happen during the day, when any fool knows owls are busy catching up on their sleep. Fat Rabbit was back at his usual place at the head of the table, rooting through the contents of several ashtrays and breaking up the dog ends to roll rather fat and clumpy cigarettes with a packet of papers he'd found stashed away in a drawer in the guest bedroom. He waited for the general hubbub and odd sob to quieten a little before he stood up to speak. "I've been thinking," he began. "Hey up, here we go," smirked Plato from the Arga. Fat Rabbit ignored the interruption and continued. "In the light of Fluse's impassioned speech of yesterday, and the heart-touching nighttime vigil that you all held until it started to rain, it has occurred to me that I was, perhaps, a little hasty in giving up, without so much of a fight, to these barbaric state stormtroopers who want to bring the lives of some of our friends to an unjust and untimely end." There were cries of "Hurrah for Fat Rabbit!" and "Now we'll show them!" and "I bet he's run out of fags and Fitou." Once more, the rabbit waited for the noise to abate, and then asked the gathered assembly, "So, how far did you get in your plans last night to stop this dastardly culling plot?" "Well, man," said Floozy, who was secretly pleased to have Fat Rabbit back in the frame as she had discovered for herself how difficult it can sometimes be to think of cunning plans when pressed. "We thought about sending a fax to Lester Lion and Bongo the gorilla, and seeing if they could scare these would-be colours away." Lester Lion and Bongo the gorilla were old friends of Fat Rabbit's who lived in Chelmsford, and had on occasion assisted in saving the farm and its denizens from various threats from the nasty outside world. But Fat Rabbit slowly shook his head. "Sorry, Flues, but Lester and Bongo can't help. They're away in deepest, darkest Africa on safari and visiting Lester's Uncle Lionel. They sent a postcard last week of themselves posing on the bonnet of a Land Rover full of terrified tourists. Very impressive it was, too."
"How about," offered Roger, "we dig a tunnel? Archibald can stand in the courtyard, and you and Floozy and Treacle can hide underneath him and burrow away, and we can all escape and live happily ever after."
"Spiffing idea, young Roger," said Archibald from the window.
"Like they used to do in the war, what? The old vaulting horse trick."
There was a general murmuring of agreement that this sounded like a possible plan, and Roger swished his tail in glee that he had been so clever in thinking of it. However, Fat Rabbit shook his head once more. "I'm afraid there are several problems with that idea I can immediately foresee. To begin with, who's going to dig the tunnels? I failed my burrowing exams miserably." "Yeah, man, me too," confessed Floozy. "And me," added Treacle, blushing slightly with embarrassment. "Needlework was more my thing." Plato purred from the Arga.
"Great, innit?
3 rabbits and not one of them can dig an hole." "Look, burrowing is now so passé," said Fat Rabbit rather crossly. "And anyway, even if we did manage to dig a tunnel that didn't fall down around our heads in the short amount of time left to us, what then? Are Roger, Wooly, Melissa and Archibald to be condemned to live out their lives as exiles, skulking in hiding and fear around dodgy Tenor Wood, far from their friends and their nice, comfortable houses?" The thought of long days scrambling around the wood for roots and truffles, only to return to a makeshift bivouac, cold and hungry, was too much for Melissa the pig. With a despairing squeal, she burst into tears and ran out of the kitchen. "Now look what you've done," said Treacle, grabbing a box of tissues and following her friend.
"But what are we going to do then?"
asked Roger, deflated that his cunning plan had been so full of flaws. Fat Rabbit certainly was better at this planning malarkey, he thought to himself. Fat Rabbit was silent for a while, lost in thought, as the other animals waited patiently. Eventually, he took another draw on his cigarette and looked up. "It seems to me that we need to know a bit more about this Futtenmuth and this culling plan. Lightning, you're the oldest and possibly the wisest one of us. What do you know about it?" Lightning was perched high up on top of the cuckoo clock and had apparently drifted off to sleep. Fat Rabbit picked up a teaspoon and with incredible accuracy threw it at the sleeping owl so that it struck him squarely on the head. Lightning awoke with a start, wobbled, regained his balance, looked confused, and then peered down over his glasses at the rabbit.
1,000 pardons," he huffed. "Must have fallen into a brief somnotive moment there. Where were we?"
"Futtenmuth," said Fat Rabbit. "What can you tell us about it?" Lightning puffed out his feathers and began in his favourite schoolmaster's tone.
Yes. Futtenmuth is a mild but highly contagious viral infection that attacks the primary respiratory system of ungulates, causing mucus discharge from nasal passages, bronchial irritation, and a throbbing in the cranium and hooves. As a rule, it generally lasts a couple of weeks, and it is best treated with warm blankets and an infusion of rum and blackcurrants."
"You mean it's a bad cold?" asked Fat Rabbit.
Whilst medically that is not completely accurate, for the purposes of normal discourse, identification and treatment, such a description will certainly suffice," agreed Lightning.
But man, they can't go around culling folk just because they have a cold, can they? Asked Flues.
I am afraid so, my dear, confirmed Lightning. Article Foxtrot 6-4 Foxtrot Echo Tango of the Nasty and Obnoxious Diseases Act 1904 is quite specific. Any ungulate identified as suffering from foot and mouth is to be culled immediately, and any ungulates residing within 5 leagues of an infected area should be culled within 72 hours to prevent the spread of the disease. After all, no one likes a snotty jumper or the peace of the countryside to be disturbed by the constant sound of sneezing. The only exceptions are those animals defined in the said act as noble.
And which animals, pray tell, does it reckon are noble? Queried Fat Rabbit.
Horses and greyhounds. Oh, I say, that's top hole, neighed Archibald. Couldn't agree more, what? Greyhounds? Growled Blue the collie. Those lazy, poncy streaks of self-important canine who can only run quickly for about 5 minutes? How are they noble?
As you might have gathered, Blue was not overly enamoured of greyhounds, though a couple of his best friends were lurchers. And they ain't got hooves, smirked Plato. Lightning looked flustered and shuffled uncomfortably from side to side, wiping his spectacles on his feathers.
I don't make the laws, he sputtered. I simply attempt to expound them to my less legally minded compatriots.
The discussion descended into a cacophony of competing voices, opinions, some, it has to be said, rather more informed than others, and general chit-chat. Lightning was gesticulating provocatively with his spectacles. Archibald was stamping his nobility. Blue grumbled about greyhounds, and Plato peered from the Arga like a passive and untouchable observer of the 5th circle of hell. Fat Rabbit sat at the end of the table with his ears wearily covering his eyes, whilst Flues peered at him from behind her shades. So, man, what is the grand plan? She asked, lifting one of his ears to ensure she had his attention. For a moment, all she could see were the eyes of a defeated, deflated rabbit. Then, just as the flame takes hold of the paper on the lighting of a fire, the spark of an idea shone from Fat Rabbit's eyes. Hoofs, he whispered. Flues leaned in close. Would you, care to repeat that, man? Didn't quite get it.
Hooves! Shouted Fat Rabbit, so loudly that the whole kitchen stopped and stared towards him. Hooves! He shouted again, raising his roly up in triumph. It's all about hooves!
Pardon? Asked Roger. Yeah, right, I think, said Flues.
He's lost it,
said Plato, shaking his head and slowly swishing his tail from side to side.
He's a rabbit with a habit. He's skinny but they call him Fat Rabbit. He's a rabbit and there you have it. If he offers you a drink you better grab it.
Nailed it, you bugger.